Renee Finlay, and we are here chatting about the CRE-IQI, and I'm here with Roxanne Bainbridge. And we're just having a really interesting conversation in there about Indigenous capacity building and research, and you had some great thoughts on that. So could you introduce yourself and then maybe tell us a little bit about Indigenous capacity building and research?
Sure.
Thank you.
Okay, so I'm Roxanne Bainbridge, as you just said. I'm Goongarrie from the southwestern Queensland, out of Charleville, Roma, Mitchell sort of triangle area.
Oh, yep, I know that area.
Yeah, from out there. I'm the Director of the Centre for Indigenous Health Equity Research at CRE University in Cairns. And a big focus of our centre is building Indigenous research capacity. And a big focus of the CRE is also building Indigenous research capacity. But what I see in most CREs is that there's actually not a lot of dedicated funding to Indigenous capacity building. There's capacity building more broadly, but the expectation is that without dedicated action or otherwise, that it's just going to happen automatically. And to a certain degree, that can happen, but it's not for everyone.
Yeah.
And bringing in new people to into a space that they're unfamiliar and totally new environment, alien environment, where they can't really connect with a lot of other Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander people. I think that's a bit of an issue. So we're, for example, in this CRE, and not for want of trying, because it's just one of the challenges, there's not that many people, but there are strategies and there are ways of letting people talk through things in a safe space. And one of the things that I think works really well is having that Indigenous only space.
Yeah.
And in every CRE or any other capacity building component, I've seen that is absolutely critical, because people just need that safe space. They're coming from a whole different perspective, and they need to be able to discuss methodology, whatever, in a whole different way.
Absolutely.
Yeah, and be able to articulate that in a way that they don't have to be worried who's judging.
Yeah.
And have those really hard conversations with each other. But then there's also valuable in Indigenous, non-Indigenous sort of interfaces, a lot of value in that space as well, but they need to be facilitated.
Yeah.
And I don't see that happening a lot.
No, it doesn't happen a lot, and I know that as an Aboriginal researcher, emerging, young, new to the space, or reasonably new to the space, there is other additional things that we need to discuss: responsibilities to community, responsibilities to our family, the different expectations that are placed on us, self-care, which I don't think we discuss either.
Definitely not. Self-care.
Yeah, because people often, I noticed, open up differently to Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander researchers or research assistants than they would so then we carry some of the stuff that we're... Yeah, so I think you're right. An Indigenous only space is really important.
We do. We have that care and responsibility for community, and I think it's something that's not actually, listed in our workload either.
No, it's not your job description, is it?
No, but you're called upon to do everything Indigenous in the university, for example, but it's not part of your job. But you carry a really heavy burden with them.
You do.
And you can't make a mistake.
No, there's no room for error, and it's not just going to reflect on you, but your community, your family, and the other Indigenous academics that come through the system. You're right. What would you like to see, other than having an Indigenous-only space, what would you like to see change with the way people currently do research capacity in things like CREs? So you've said dedicated funding.
There definitely needs to be dedicated, well, not just funding, but other resources too. I don't see why universities can't step up to the plate, providing scholarships and other things, but also I'd like to see more employment. I don't think, for example, there's employment opportunities in CREs, whether that's in admin. It's not about only research capacity development, but it's capacity development of people.
Yeah.
And I don't see why there can't be someone trained in research management, for example, in in the administrative side of things. It doesn't have to be you are doing research.
Absolutely.
You know, so there's plenty of space to have those conversations as well. I don't see that happen a lot, and I realise, I mean, I can't talk because, you know, we try to employ people, but it's really hard.
It is really hard.
Especially away in Cairns, it's really hard.
Oh, I can imagine.
Yeah.
Although it is a beautiful country, it's hard to attract people, I think.
Well, yeah, they're not, there's, you know, you don't have a ready-made, and that, which means you have to dedicate time to build capacity, and it's time you kind of don't really have. And, you know, it's a bit of a cycle, but, you know, if the university stepped up and did their job, I think it would.
What do you think is, I'm going to ask you one last question, and this is a question you know, you often get asked, but what is the value of having Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander people engaged in research at all levels? And I know that might seem like a simplistic question, but I don't think a lot of people that work in the space that aren't Aboriginal often get that, what the value is. And we're not just cultural brokers.
No, and that's where it's usually seen as you're valued for your engagement capacity. But, you know, it's about right from the outset getting the priorities right. Is it the community priority to do that research? Well, maybe not.
Yeah.
And if it, you know, and priorities shift.
Yeah.
Timing. But, you know, is it, it starts right down at the base. What questions are you answering? You know, what questions are you asking?
Yeah.
If you don't get if you're not asking the right questions, you're not going to have valuable and useful research, and you're not going to have research impact in the long term. Doesn't matter how hard you try to translate that to all your publications and every other thing like that. Just joking.
Yeah.
Sort of joking. So, yeah, well, you're just not going to get research. If you're asking the wrong questions, it's just like, you know, you're measuring the wrong things.
Yeah. And ultimately, the research isn't about your publications. It should be about impact or outcomes for Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander people. So.
Yeah. So if you want meaningful data that's going to make transformation on the ground, you've got to have people there to know what to ask. Yeah. Where do you want to go? All of that sort of thing. It's nothing to do with. Yes, it's a little bit to do with engagement, but that's not
beyond
where it's at. That's just part of the picture.
Yeah.
In fact, it's it's interesting because people say engagement, but it's a very small part of the picture.
And I also find that having Aboriginal people when you're analysing the data as well, it gives you a different perspective and insight, and I think that's hugely important because obviously non-Aboriginal people often come from a different lens.
Yeah.
And they might misinterpret what our mob are actually saying.
Totally. They totally do.
Yeah.
Often.
Yeah. Absolutely.
Yeah, so it sort of goes right through.
Yeah.
It's not just about engagement, no.
No, absolutely not. Well, thank you for that. Have you got anything else you want to add about engagement or upskilling or our involvement in research?
To be quite honest, one thing I'd like to say is, you know, funding bodies are not supportive of Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander development in research. You know, the whole Chelsea thing, and good on her. But to be critical of Inaction MRC, for example, probably not going to do me any favours. But, you know, I put in an application earlier this year and we didn't even get the criteria assessed. So, yes. So I think, you know, they're the body that espouses the guidelines and ethics and all of that, but they need to reflect inwardly and make sure they're doing their job in that space as well.
Yeah. You would not be the only person to say that, not at all. And I don't think you'll be the last, at least until things change. And I think on the other end as well, we need peer-reviewed journals to actually put pressure. So you've got the funding and the peer review to make sure that there are mechanisms at this end too, that if the research hasn't been done with Aboriginal engagement and input the whole way, so that way, if you're bookending it, we'll end up with better research.
Yes, totally. And it's all about impact.
Yeah, absolutely, for our mob. And I think that's the thing people forget is, yes, we, as all of us as Aboriginal researchers, need money, but we do this for the love of our community.
Oh, yeah, absolutely.
And not saying non-Aboriginal people don't, but it's intensely personal for us.
Yes, it is. It's just totally different, you know, and they walk away at the end of the day.
And we can't do that.
No. Okay.
Thank you very much
Thank
for
you.
that.